What's up, guys? This is Rikk, and you are watching The Pumpkin Patch. So today on The Pumpkin Patch, I decided that I'd rather just record it onto my phone straight onto YouTube. I actually did do a video at home, but I'm feeling this a little bit more right now. So usually I do have a topic to talk about, some sort of review or something like that, but today I just wanted to let you guys know how I got into horror punk. I figured maybe you guys would be a little interested in that. With that being said, I do have some review stuff going out soon. Make sure to check out nothingbutaNightmare.com and listen to Dirty Dead's latest album that dropped today. That will be my next review. It is called Nocturnal Emissions, and I'm sure it will be fantastic, just like the single they dropped. With that being said, let's get started, because this one is kind of a little bit of a longer story, I guess. I'll try and keep it to the cliff notes for you. So some of you may know that growing up, I was mainly into, metalcore, post-hardcore bands. I was going to a venue in San Diego called Soma. I was going there almost every weekend from about 8th grade to, probably 12th grade. A pretty large gap. But even before then, in elementary school, I was into bands like Linkin Park, Korn, Limp Bizkit, very into the nu metal thing, which I suppose is not too out of the ordinary, considering that was the time that it was pretty big. My older sister got me into Linkin Park when I was probably in about the 4th or 5th grade, and they've been one of my favorite bands ever since, albeit their latest stuff not as, influential on me as their older stuff. Rest in peace, Chester. Even before that, though, my dad tells a story to me that when I was in my mom's stomach, that he put headphones up against her belly and played Kiss, and I kicked. So apparently I was born in the Kiss army, and, was born to be a rocker. So, yeah, I want to say 6th grade, one of my buddies showed me From Autumn to Ashes, which currently happens to be my favorite band of all time, and I feel like I really got into them, and I got into the hardcore, post-hardcore, like the harsher stuff, in middle school. At first I wasn't as into it. It was always that sort of, oddly enough, I still enjoyed them, but I think I liked them mainly because of the melodic parts, as opposed to the heavy parts. My cousin was really into heavier bands at the time, and I would always, talk to him like, oh, but you can't understand what they're saying, how do you like this? And eventually I think I understood it and got really into it. Maybe that was the sign of the times or something, but like I said, I always ended up at Soma and saw a lot of these post-hardcore, metalcore bands. Like I said, I was very into From Autumn to Ashes. I was into bands like Armor for Sleep, Silverstein, Drop Dead Gorgeous, The Devil Wears Prada, bands like that, that sort of came out at the time and continued to perpetuate the post-hardcore, metalcore, I guess emo scene, if you will. Side note, I hate the phrase emo, because, if any music is good, it probably has some sort of emotion, and it can't, emo is sort of in my head, a faux pas, and it doesn't really make much sense to me as a genre title. But I digress. I was into that stuff, had my hair long, straightened my hair, all that stuff. I was trying to be a scene kid, but in reality I was just some chubby dork with a headband and some long hair. At the same time, I was still planted in my hard rock roots, in middle school, having come from elementary school listening to bands like Linkin Park and things like that. In middle school, I was very into the hard rock stuff. There's a reason why I got this Disturbed tattoo. I was very into Disturbed, and was, you know, sort of branching out through that, and eventually got more into metalcore and things like that. But, you know, stuck true to that. You know, Disturbed put out albums when I was in high school, still very into that. I also eventually got into bands that were like hair metal bands, Motley Crue, 80s metal, Iron Maiden. I think I've had more Iron Maiden t-shirts than any other band that I've had, just because, you know, Hot Topic sold them in a ridiculous amount, at the time at least. And yeah, so I was, you know, going through bands like that, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and Metallica until I burned them out. I can't listen to them anymore. There was this really cool band I remember at the time that mixed like hardcore with heavy metal, sort of Iron Maiden style, called 3 Inches of Blood. They put out like 3 albums. Their second one, Fire Up the Blades, was badass, and it mixed those two genres together. I particularly remember that. So it wasn't until about senior year that I started getting into punk rock. The band I was in at the time, Setting the Sail, was supposed to be like a screamo, post-hardcore band, and my bandmates actually eventually got into punk music. They started listening to Black Flag, the Misfits, the Germs, etc. And so they turned me on to that. You know, at the same time, my buddies in school were also the punk rockers. So this sort of culmination of the time where I was getting into punk rock music from the bandmates and my friends. I was listening to stuff like No Cash, Leftover Crack. I started listening to Rancid. I got really into the Misfits. I got really into AFI, which was really important to me. They actually turned me on to more of the Misfits style as well, you know, with their covers of Halloween and Demonomania and things like that. And I think from there I sort of, I wouldn't have considered myself a horror punk at the time, but I think one of my buddies in LA Girls had called me that once. Like, I'm not sure exactly why he had said it, but I think he knew I was very into the Misfits. I was always suggesting we do Misfits covers, and we did a lot of them. Unfortunately, you know, as a band, I really liked our original stuff, but I think the crowd mainly liked our Misfits covers. But you know, he eventually had said something about me being a horror punk, and I didn't know really what it was. I didn't really dabble too much into it yet. But eventually, I was getting into, ironically enough, I went through like dubstep and electronic music to get to like agrotech industrial, and got into like some more gothier stuff. And at that time, the bands that I found were bands like Cyclone 9, Dawn of Ashes, which, you know, they're basically deathcore bands with like electronics. And so it really meshed well with my head, and I really wanted to start an industrial band, because LA Girls was breaking up at the time due to our singer moving to San Francisco. And so I looked on Craigslist, tried to find a goth band in San Diego. The only band that was looking for a drummer happened to be They Feed at Night, you know, the death rock band that I had played with for about 5 years. I didn't know what death rock was, but I checked it out and I enjoyed it. It was good. It was a little rough around the edges, but I figured it would be fun to play in, because I was playing punk rock before then. We started, I jammed with them, and I guess the rest is history. But at the time, you know, when we were playing in the band, we played with a bunch of horror punk bands, we played with a bunch of death rock bands, so I got a little bit more into goth. I would never consider myself goth, but I definitely took a liking to some of the stuff that I had heard, you know, when we were playing in clubs and things like that, and I still really enjoy some of that stuff. Again, I don't really go out of my way as much to listen to like post-punk goth or death rock or anything like that. Wendy's a little bit more into that stuff than I am, so I'll hear it, you know, here and then, but still didn't really consider myself a goth. You know, like I said, we were playing with bands like Order of the Fly sometimes. We had played with Calabrese, we played with Creature Feature, some of those more horror punk campy bands. I guess Order of the Fly is not as campy as the others, but some of that stuff stuck with me. You know, I was listening to those bands a little bit more, but I still wouldn't consider myself a horror punk at the time. Not until the Other came to the States that I really had gotten to a point where I was like, well, wow, this is something that I really enjoy. The first time I had seen them was in Long Beach. We were opening for them, and I was just sort of awestruck at the fact that there was like this huge show going on and a pretty solid crowd. And I didn't listen to their stuff as much, but I knew I wanted to play with them. And I was friends with Van Heller from B-Movie Monsters, and so hanging out with them was pretty cool. And like I was friends with the bands that were playing and things like that. So it was really cool to get a chance to hang out. But I think I was just like in awe, like, okay, this is cool, this is going to be really fun. I had actually thrown my first show was the one with the other in San Diego, and while it wasn't as good as I had hoped it would be, it was a lot of fun to get to see them and play with them again the second time and see the reaction of the people that did care about them. I had played with Calabrese the week before with JXV, and you know, just sort of going through that time of getting more into horror punk a little bit before that, you know, starting JXV, which is supposed to be this horror punk, horror influence hardcore band, and then, so I was already down the rabbit hole, but I wasn't there yet. Like, I think it took a little while longer for me to actually solidify, like, this is the community I want to be a part of. You know, and I feel like the exact moment that happened was when I saw Goolsby play at the Till 2 Club. It was 13 Wolves, Argyle Goolsby, Stellar Corpses, and Newgrave. And his performance was ridiculous. Like, I hadn't gotten into Blitzkid yet very much. I knew some of their stuff. I knew some of the Spiderweb bands, like Darrow, and I knew a little bit of their stuff. I knew Shadow Windhawk stuff. I knew the other, like, a little bit of the bands that were connected, but I didn't know Blitzkid yet. And it wasn't until that show that I really was like, holy shit, I need to get into Blitzkid now. He put on a phenomenal show, and he did, you know, his originals, but he also did some Blitzkid stuff. Played Terror in the Haunted House, which is my all-time favorite Blitzkid song because of that show. And it was, you know, at that point where I, you know, started joining the horror punk groups online, started, you know, considering myself a horror punk. And the next time that I have sort of one of those mecca moments was at the Goolsby Calabrese show in LA that Robert Rythe and I sort of talked about doing the Rythers, and even though I didn't get to see Goolsby, it was just really cool to be at that show. Calabrese killed it, and the Stellar Corpses were badass, the Returners were cool, like, you know, the part of Goolsby's set that I did get to see was rad. Getting to, you know, chat with those guys for a little bit was just, it was really cool, and I felt in my element, you know, compared to at the other where I was, like, so excited that I was overwhelmed. Definitely felt in my element at that time. Sorry, I have some people walking by because I am in the car. Yeah, I mean, with that being said, I just wanted to share all that with you guys, and you know, try to ask, you know, for a discussion. Like, did you guys start out as horror fans? Were you raised by some horror punks? Or did you find it through other bands? Like I said, I originally started with bands like Kiss and Linkin Park and Disturbed, eventually got through hardcore and post-hardcore, got into punk rock, and ended up here. Was it similar stories for you guys, or were you into the bands like the Misfits from the get-go? Anyways, please leave a like, please leave a comment, please subscribe, please share, do all that stuff, and I'll come out with some more content later. See you guys next time. You've been watching The Pumpkin Patch.